All right, today we are going to learn about the Mongols. The Mongols had a huge impact on world history, not just becoming the largest land-based empire in the history of the world, but also in the fact that they shaped the lives of so many countries that they interacted with, that many nations shaped their identities um, or just had a complete reworking of their systems due to the impact of the Mongols. So we'll talk about them today. So first of all, who were the Mongols? Before they became famous for their conquering, they lived up in the steppes in northern China. They lived kind of, you can see the Great Wall there above the green Chinese, and then in the red, you can kind of see where the Mongols were hanging out by the Gobi Desert. They were out there, they were herders, becoming really good at archery and riding on horseback. And they had a fairly equal society between men and women, which was kind of really odd for the time. But remember, we've talked about before in this class where um, the less you have as a society, the more equal men and women tend to be, and that seemed to be true here. As a religion, they believed in what we call shamanism, or a belief in the spirit that spirits dwelled within all things in nature. And because of their shamanist beliefs, what you will find out is as they conquer other nations, they really don't care about what religious beliefs they have, and so they'll actually be fairly forward, I guess, in that way, and that they'll have a lot of religious tolerance for the people they conquer. But you can't really talk about the Mongols unless you focus on one guy, and that guy is Genghis Khan. Like, not to get all one person great man history here, but Genghis Khan really kind of makes the Mongolian Empire. Born with the name Temujin, he managed to unite all of the Mongol tribes under his one rule. Before, like, kind of in a similar way like some Native American tribes had been, there had been groups of them who all spoke similar languages, but he was the first one to unite them all. And because of this, he was called the first great Khan or the first great king. So that's where the Khan part of his name comes from. And he did this. He achieved this unification of the Mongolian tribes by changing how the military was done. He incorporated conquered tribes into his own tribe, thus giving everybody a sense of belonging. Um, and then he advanced people in the military based on their skill, not necessarily on their birth, which let the top generals rise up through the military, not just those whose parents happened to be fairly wealthy. All right, but let's get to the big stuff, the important things for how the Mongols impacted the rest of us through their expansion. And so, they used their superior horse riding and archery skills to start in Central Asia and then move on throughout the Eurasian continent until they reached as far west as Kiev in modern day Ukraine. They even got into Poland, down in the southwest, into Iraq and Syria. They went all the way east into Korea and tried to launch an invasion of Japan. They conquered all of China and got stopped at what is the border of today Vietnam. And what was kind of interesting is they were actually very quick and adaptive when it came to learning military techniques because they had never actually seen walls or full-on cities before they left the Mongolian steppes. But once they left, what they did is um, they would capture soldiers who had seen a wall, and from there they would learn things like catapults and siege techniques. That way, they could build weapons to destroy the walls of these cities. Now, there were some cities who just surrendered on sight. The Mongols were known for their brutality and conquest. They would often burn cities to the ground and cause massive destruction. And so some, fearing that that would be their fate, simply surrendered before the Mongols could wipe them out. But of course, part of the reason the Mongols gained their reputation, why people surrendered to them, was because they would wipe out cities. And so it was a combination of people surrendering before they even attacked and people who resisted and were eventually demolished. Genghis Khan did not live to see the maximum extent of his empire. In fact, after his death, his successors continued his conquests. The most important battle, we would say, of the Mongol conquests is the one that really ended the Islamic Golden Age, the Battle of Baghdad in modern-day Iraq. Baghdad at the time had been the capital of the Arabian Empire, um, and its conquest really destroyed the Arabian Empire there. And we often consider it the end of the Islamic Golden Age. So we've been talking about how in Europe this was kind of considered a dark age, a bad time for learning, whereas in the Muslim world this was an age of enlightenment, an age of a lot of scientific advancements. China as well, like I mentioned, would be completely conquered, and had the Mongols not been stopped at the Battle of Ain Jalut, yeah, I apologize for that terrible pronunciation, but of Ain Jalut, which is over in modern-day Syria, if they had not been stopped by the Egyptians there, they could have probably continued their conquests down into Africa. But in something that will sound a little familiar to you, or at least I hope it sounds familiar, just like with Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan did not leave a clear successor. Unlike Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan had a lot of children, and so he broke his empire into four, he didn't break his empire into four. His grandsons broke his empire into four major Mongol Khanates, we call them. One being the Khanate of the Golden Horde, which would greatly impact the history of Russia, which we will get to later. The Chagatai Khanate, which dominated over Afghanistan, Pakistan, and truly Central Asia. The Il Khanate, which would basically become a new Persian empire. And then the Yuan dynasty in China, or sometimes called the Great Khanate, the one that still had Mongolia in it, and kind of ruled over the Chinese for a while. Mongolia would actually continue its decline throughout the next few hundred years, and would remain completely independent until the year 1691. And so one of the great debates we have as historians is, was Genghis Khan and the Mongols, were their contributions to the world positive or negative? And here's some of the arguments for positive. Like I said, this was the largest contiguous, or consistently connected by land, empire. In fact, by the time the Mongols reached their maximum extent, they controlled 16% of the globe and 25% of the world's population, which is nothing to sniff at. They managed to create safe trade along the Silk Road through something that we call the Pax Mongolica, or which just means the peace of the Mongols. And what they did was they heavily patrolled trade routes and made them safe. And so what we see is people will actually start moving away from using the sea routes for trade, and will start going back to using the Silk Road again and start using land routes, now that they know they can get from place to place without being robbed by bandits. As well, we see that there is an increased communication between Asia and Europe during this time, and I've already talked about how, due to their shamanistic beliefs, the Mongols were actually fairly tolerant of other religions, and you didn't really see much religious persecution at this time. But let's not be dumb about this either. The Mongols were brutal. There are some arguments for negativity. Look at the quote that you see up here from Genghis Khan himself. He said, "The greatest happiness is to scatter your enemy and drive him before you, to see his cities reduced to ashes, to see those who loved him shrouded in tears, and to gather into your bosom his wives and daughters." Like, Genghis Khan was kind of a mean guy and brutally killed a lot of people. Also, he screwed around with a lot of women. In fact, we know today that the vast majority of Mongolia's population is in some way related to Genghis Khan because he had so many wives and concubines. It's also possible that he spread the Black Death. Because of this renewed trade, this allowed for the spread of disease, specifically through mice. And so we believe that it is possible that one of the positive things he did may have contributed to a big negative. He also maybe were 50% certain, so not really at all certain, that he may have possibly invented biological warfare. We think that he may have spread the plague to some cities by catapulting plague-filled body parts into besieged cities, thus spreading the plague and bringing cities to their knees. We're not 100% sure about that. There are some texts that say that this happened, but we don't necessarily have other texts to back them up. So we're not 100% certain that this actually happened, but there is a belief, a theory, that he could have perhaps invented biological warfare. All right, a recap I want you to make sure you know. What reforms did Genghis Khan bring to his military that helped him in his conquests? And what were some positive things that came from the Mongol conquests? Your funnies for today. When somebody tells you to stop saying sorry and you have to resist the urge. Some of you when you're taking notes in this class. And finally, in my bad pun of the day. And that's all I have for you guys today. Remember, you have the ability to pause and rewind these notes, but otherwise I will see you tomorrow.